There it is. Couldn't remember where it went.
All right, 7:05. We can get started.
Okay. Well, do you want to introduce yourself first, since you're the actual owner of this meetup?
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Daniel Schutzsmith. I'm one of the organizers for Newport Richie WordPress Meetup, along with Jim True. And
I'm only an assistant organizer. You're the real organizer. Yeah.
Well, there we go. We try to meet once a month. It's the second Tuesday of the month. We started back up, 3 months ago? And before that, it was a couple years. So we're back in business, and we're being on time and regular. So we're excited.
Yeah. You're doing a good job. That's what matters. And I'm Jim True. I am the organizer for WordPress Tampa Bay. I am an organizer along with Elaine down there, who's currently invisible, and Travis and Jen, who are all of our organizers for WordPress St. Pete. We meet on the first and third Tuesdays, but we're taking the third Tuesdays off right now for the pandemic until the end of the year, I think, just to give us a break. But we do an Ask Us Anything every first Tuesday of the month on StreamYard and on Meetup. So if you guys want to join in for that, have a time. And I'm going to go on mute for a bit because I just heard my puppy make a really sad sigh sound. So I'm going to go check on him. He's had some stuff today, so I'll be back in a bit.
Okay. So to get started, in the past, we've been doing, while COVID's going on, we've been having these kind of virtual meetups and talking with each other and just kind of having a good old walkthrough of kind of the plugins and things we're using and things like that. So since we have a small team here, today's going to be, I'm going to present about basically how we use static WordPress deployment at Pinellas County government, where I work. But to start, why don't we go around the Zoom room and introduce ourselves a little bit, just so other folks know who we are on the call. And I'm just going to go in order from what I see on here. So let's just say, your name, what you do, kind of what your interest in WordPress is. Maybe a tip or something if you have any. I don't know. But just keeping it nice and simple. Adam Warner, you're first.
Yeah, first timer here. Long time WordPress guy, community guy, software user. Tried to be a designer, tried to be a developer, realized I sucked at both of them, so I became an implementer. Been using it since 2005. I've done a bunch of different things with WordPress through the years. Most recently, the last few years, I've been with GoDaddy Pro on the GoDaddy Pro, the tool team. And piece of advice, don't go taking any wooden nickels. Someone told me that once in high school. It stuck with me.
Slugs. Remember we used to put them in the video game machines. Anyways.
Oh, is that what that means? See, I learned something new today. Sorry.
You put the slug in and it comes back out. Andy.
Yes. Up here from Canada. I spend half my time in the Newport Richie area. I've got a condo there in Sunnybrook. Although I'm not sure if I'm coming back down this December or not, the way things are going. This is kind of interesting because I developed my first website in 1995 using Notepad. So we're back to everything old is new again, essentially. Because really this is all just, a static site is essentially just HTML with some CSS thrown in, correct?
That's exactly what I'm going to be talking about, yep.
Yep. Okay. So, but I'll be interested in seeing the new. If anybody goes in the Wayback Machine, look at some of that stuff and go, "Geez, that looks horrible." But I'm interested in seeing new implementations now. Yes.
Cool. And Andy, you're in Canada right now, right?
I am in a little place called Big Valley.
Very cool.
351 people, 30 miles to the nearest grocery store.
A little bit smaller than Newport Richie.
over the air internet.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Daniel Willitzer, you want to give us a small little intro?
Yes, been a long time web developer and kind of just always tinkered it with computers and stuff when I was little. My career has been in the IT telecommunications field. it just kind of came about where clients just started requesting more so about, hey, can you help us with our website? Or can you put this application interface together so we can make these systems talk? So I'm like, okay, well, I might as well get used to understanding these different mainframes. So I got used to linking things with, old DOS systems to the front end to make them interactive. So as you can see, in the 90s, you got responsive tables. Ooh. But, back to these static websites that we're using now, which is actually quite interesting. I'm like, it's a come about just a really complex way with the end results. Yeah, that's just a little bit about me. It's just web developer. I do more back end than front end. But I do IT infosec, things like that for security penetration stuff. So that's a little bit about me. Ventured to Florida from California, here to stay.
Very cool. Diana, I have you on here next.
Just a moment. Hello.
Hello.
I don't live close to you guys. I live in southeastern Florida, in Boca Raton. Yeah, but the moment I saw that you were talking about converting the WordPress into HTML, I knew that I have to be there and see what you have to show me. You can show me. And well, I've been a WordPress enthusiast for quite a long time, even before. I remember when it first appeared, and before that we have movable type, and we all went dynamic, and now we're all looking to getting back to static HTML again. And that's it.
Awesome. Thanks for joining on the East Coast.
Yes.
Let's see. Elaine.
Glad to be here and see some familiar faces, some new faces. And I'm a co-leader with Jim True over at St. Pete, WordPress St. Pete. And my background is graphic design, and I went back for web design. And then my first clients were like, well, how can I make edits on this website that I coded? So then I got in with WordPress, and for 3 years, we put on a WordCamp here in Tampa, and just been learning and learning and learning, and also found out very quickly that clients want their sites to rank. So I kind of delved into SEO too. So it's just been really fun to learn, each stage. So this will be interesting to see. Which way are we going? HTML to WordPress, or Diana said WordPress to HTML. We're not going there, right?
No, we're going WordPress to HTML.
Yeah. What?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, headless. That headless thing. Okay.
Similar, and I'll talk a little bit about the difference between static and headless, and also how they overlap. But yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Very cool.
Sounds good.
Eric, you want to give us an intro?
Yeah, so I'm Eric. I'm in the Dallas-Fort Worth area here in Texas. I actually run the oldest and largest WordPress meetup in town. We're about the 3,100 members, which kind of cool. We've been around 11 years. I've been doing virtual events for WordPress since March. I've been doing virtual events for meetups since 2009. So I've been doing this a long time. Developer, focus on security and email.
Very cool. That's awesome. And then Scott, I believe I have it.
All right. Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Scott, and I am a neuroscientist at the University of Florida. And I'm interested in learning a little bit more about some of the options to host my personal website. I've had a website that's gone back all the way since I was a kid. So I feel like if you mix Andy's story and Diana's story together, that's my story. Started hacking away on Notepad, and then I upgraded to movable type, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Then I upgraded to WordPress in the kind of around 2010, and it's like, wow, this is great. But to be honest, I've gotten a little bit nervous in the last several years because I noticed it kind of gets bigger and bigger, and security is more of an issue. So, to be honest, I've been looking at some of the alternative static site generators that I could migrate away from WordPress to.
Yeah.
So when I saw this meetup advertised about using WordPress for a static website, I thought, wow, I got to join and see what Daniel has to say. So I'm interested to hear the discussion tonight.
Awesome. Very cool.
Yeah.
It's funny, that actually segues us right into the presentation. So, one of the things that has been kind of interesting for me is I'm also a designer developer. I have that background, originally starting like most of you, doing a lot of HTML and CSS originally. And can everyone see my second screen here? You should see the Pinellas County thing there. Just give me a thumbs up if you could see.
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, cool. So for one of the things I've been trying to tackle is trying to figure out how we can make websites with WordPress, but streamline them and make them the most efficient way possible. By nature, I am ADD. That's something I welcome and I admit to everyone. If you look at me on Twitter, you'll see I actually talk about ADHD a lot. But I use that to my benefit in the fact that it allows me to hyper focus on things and really kind of look at pieces of a process that I want to perfect. If I get stuck in the perfection, though, that's where it gets kind of, out of whack. But one of the things that I've been trying to figure out really is trying to figure out how we do something like static site generators for WordPress. How do we take kind of the same types of implementations that they're doing just across the web that we're seeing, but doing it for WordPress? And so there's several different kind of examples that I'm going to show you, and I will walk through some specific things about that all. So my name's Daniel Schutzsmith. Like I said, pretty much on any social media, you can find me just at Schutzsmith. So it's always, always there. So that's the easiest way to find me. You're not going to find any other Schutzsmiths besides my kids and my wife. It's a completely made up name. I was Smith, she was Schutz. We put them together, no hyphen. That's it. There's no one else. So it's one of our folks if you come across them later in life. So why are we talking about this? Because it feels like we're doing deja vu, right? Like a lot of us, at least from what I've heard so far, is a lot of us started out doing more kind of web development with HTML and CSS and even, working on things like movable type. I remember that. I remember doing empty templates and things like that. Why does it make sense for us to actually, look at doing something like a static site? For me, it was I wanted to scratch my own itch. I had done the Women's March website, which actually I'll just bring up. I didn't put a slide in here, but womensmarch.org. Oh, never mind. It's not coming up anymore. I had done the Women's March website. Yeah, they must not have it there anymore. But when I had done that, what I was trying to do was make it as secure as possible. And this is where I first got this thinking of, maybe we take the whole concept of what we're doing with WordPress and where we're editing the system and actually put it behind kind of a, an HTTP password, put it behind a password protected kind of area so regular folks can't just stumble in there and mess around with it. For the Women's March, for those of you who know, I'm not getting into the controversy or anything like that, but we all know it's very well known. There's a lot of folks that don't want it to, don't want them to be able to do the things they want to do. And so a large part of that was people trying to hack their websites. And so I was moving them basically from a Wix-based system into a WordPress system. And so looking at that, it was how do you make it the most secure way possible? And for me, it was, well, we have to do that in a way that makes it so that you can just literally edit the environment in a place away from everyone else. But you can actually push out the code and the content to folks to be able to consume later on. Fast forward a couple of years, that was about 2 or 3 years ago I worked with them. I just came to Pinellas County government. I started in February. I started February 24th. And March, I think it was March 8th, we started really focusing on COVID and coronavirus. So I was barely in the door and we started, having this crisis that we had to work with. I was brought into Pinellas County to really help them with their website redesign, specifically with a focus of, guiding it from a project management perspective, working with vendors, figuring out the technology, figuring out kind of the direction that we would go in, but to do it in a way that would make us be able to kind of be forward thinking, for the future. We wanted to make it so that it was a content management system that we could keep evolving over time. We could, pare it down if we needed to. We could branch it out to create microsites, whatever the case might be. So for us, when the crisis came with COVID, it came to doing it the old way, which was one way we could go, which is if you look at the actual PinellasCounty.org website, you'll notice real fast that it's actually a static website. I don't mean static generated. I mean, it's static. I mean, it's just HTML and CSS and JavaScript. If you want to edit a page, we're literally going into Dreamweaver, editing the page and putting it back onto the server. So these are, old school methods that are actually being used on the site. And so what we're trying to do is be a little bit more forward thinking. Everyone on the team, from the innovation department to the technology department, everyone in marketing, which I'm in, everyone's really focusing on, how do we make it the best editing experience possible? And for us, that's WordPress. It's to go, full in on WordPress, make it something where we can be able to work with it. Anyone on the team could be able to necessarily edit it that's been trained appropriately. And make it a way that basically we can give it out to the public, very quickly. Right now, and it's no fault of anyone on any teams, but obviously, if we have static pages and we have all these changes, if you want to update, let's say, like a whole department, section of the site, that's going to be a few days work. Like, you have to literally go in there and edit these pages and figure out where the code is and do all these things. Not to mention, it might have version control issues at the end of the day. And so for us, it was, how do we take WordPress and actually use it in a similar fashion? How do we serve it up in a way that can still be fast, can still be secure, can still give it to folks in a way that doesn't expose the content management system at all? And for that, this was kind of the challenge. And again, going back to the ADD, I love these types of things to kind of figure out how I could pull them apart. So to me, it was the challenge of figuring out how we could actually make that happen. So for this site, this is covid19.pinellascounty.org. You can go to it. It's live right now. On that website, and actually I'll just back out so we can look at the website a little bit. This is the actual website. On that website, everything you see here is static. So even the fact that, if you looked in the code, you'll see like it's referencing Yoast, and you'll see that it's referencing like advanced custom fields and some stuff. It's referencing like an Instagram plugin that's pretty popular. All those things, though, are actually being pulled in completely static. So it's making copies of those basically and putting them right into the file that we put up on the server that delivers it out to everyone out there and in the inner space. So for this, this was kind of the test subject, right? This was like, if we could do this on a microsite and it could make sense, and people could be able to edit it, and it could go out and be static like this, then we can truly do it even on a larger site, like our redesign or other things like that. So we're not quite sure whether we'll do it on the redesign, and I'll talk about that, why that is. But for microsites, this is definitely the way we're doing it moving forward. And I'm going to show you the process for that too, and what specifically we use for that. And then the other big reason for me that I wanted to do this, doing static, is it's another possible way to work with WordPress. I'm really a huge fan in the WordPress way, and I talk about this a little bit too in these slides. In the fact that there's so many ways for us to do something, and it's really important that we find the way that makes sense for us and our teams. And so that's what I saw here. I saw an opportunity to be able to do that, to find a way to be able to work with static in a way that made sense. So what is a static website? And I think we all had definitions you even started telling me just in the intros, but stripped down, it's really just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's what we're really talking about when we're talking about a static website. taking with a grain of salt that there's no true definition. You know, you don't have the W3C saying what a static website is or anything like that. But in general terms, when we're talking about static websites, or someone says, oh, you know, I'm creating a static website, this is what we're really talking about. The heavy, you know, outlier is usually on JavaScript for most of the static site generators that you may have heard of before. And I'll show kind of a queue of all those ones there in a little bit. The thing to realize, though, is that, you know, all a static website is really the front end. You know, we're not talking about the back end necessarily. We're not talking about communicating to databases. We're not talking about doing any of those things. So it's really coming down to just the front end code, you know, the presentation layers, if you will, of what we're working with. So it's the HTML, like you see here, that's just saying, happy hello world day, this one. But there's no back end to it. So, you know, things like PHP and MySQL do not exist in the concept of static websites. There is no database for us to hit. There is no, you know, logic for us to do via PHP. So any logic that would usually be done with that is either going to be something that we're literally saving out as static pages. So in the reference of, like, you know, maybe you have a list of something and you have multiple pages to that list, you know, and you have 4 different pages, we would actually save those out as static pages rather than just being the actual thing that looks up in the database. And the other key, you know, here too, is that with PHP, we're able to do things like, you know, randomly generating content on a page. All those types of things would have to be actually offloaded onto JavaScript instead. And so it's a different concept and a different way of thinking to be able to do some of those things. So knowing that, why would we do static in the first place? There's a ton of different reasons. People tell you different things. But the 3 that I hear most often, and the 3 that actually captivated me, the first one is that it's more secure than a publicly accessible CMS. What you'll see, and what I'm going to show you, is that the content management system that we're working with isn't accessible to the public at all. There's no way they can get to it. I would have to tell you the URL, which I'm not going to do. And I'd also have to tell you the username and password for you to even hit the site and be able to get into what would be normally the public version of it, to be able to see things. And then on top of that, to get into the WordPress admin, you all know you'd have to have username and password to get to that as well. And on top of that, we also have IP filtering. So I can actually stop you from even getting in just by looking at your IP addresses and knowing kind of where you're located. And this is what, you know, becomes kind of enticing. It becomes this whole idea that we can make it more secure. We can keep people from getting in, ostensibly by making sure that we keep it a kind of a secret handshake that people can use. Only the folks that are on my team know where to get this. You know, even other folks that are in Pinellas County government don't know how to edit that website. So it's only the people who need to know that could actually be able to get that, because really, imagine that, you know, someone puts out the wrong type of information on a COVID-19 website. We're government. That would be detrimental. That's the kind of thing that ends careers, but also makes, you know, the complete public, you know, become very alarmed. And so to me, the sense of security is actually a really important thing. The other key thing to me is actually it's cleaner than caching. I don't even think I have to go much into it, but any of us who created a WordPress website, I'm sure you've messed with caching at one point in time. I'm sure that you've had to flush the caches. You've had to flush multiple caches. You've had to do it on the host. You've had to do it in the WP admin. You had to do it in your browser, and then a client would tell you something and you'd ask them to flush their caches. It's just it just becomes a monotony of a cache mess. Not to be said, I mean, that actually can be very useful to work with. But the reality is that it can be also a real pain in the butt to work with as well. In what we're doing here, there is no caching. There is nothing else that we need to actually be able to flush or change or anything like that. And that's what I'm gonna walk you through and show you. And then the last big thing is it improves page speed for better page ranking and SEO. You know, there's studies shown, and actually Google says it themselves, that the faster they actually a page runs, the better the ranking will be. One of the key things that I think, you know, when we're talking about static sites generally is that there's a huge shift in that page speed because we're simply just not calling the normal things we would be calling. We're not doing a database, lookup. We're not doing a PHP lookup. We're not, trying to load in different types of includes and things like that. They just don't exist there at all. And one of the, kind of more interesting things too, when we talk about speed, is that the actual speed it takes for us to be able to create these sites and deploy them actually isn't that bad. It does scale, like the more pages you have, the longer it might take, and the more changes of pages you make might take longer to actually deploy it. But in general, it's going to be pretty fast. Oh, I have my screen over here on the right, which actually showed me the slides, and now I see the the GIF I put in, so that's good. So that being said, one of the misconceptions, or not misconceptions, one of the things that gets confusing and that I got confused with as well is the difference between static versus headless. And so I just figured I'd kind of nip it in the bud so people kind of know. And again, this is my interpretation. I am not an expert. I am not creating a ton of sites like this, but this is from what I've seen so far and kind of what makes sense to me as I kind of break it down to understand it more. So static on the left, the reality is it has no calls to the content management system at all. There's nothing that's actually talking to that content management system. You can think of the content management system on its own island. It's completely separate. It does not talk back to that static website at all. Headless, though, is a little bit different. So headless actually is usually calling via an API. And what you may have heard of so far, or even most recently, things like JSON, JSON is a very popular one. The REST API that a lot of folks have talked about with WordPress. A more contemporary one that's just come up in the past like 2 years is GraphQL. I think I said that right, but GraphQL is another one that's hooked onto a static site generator that I'll mention a little bit called Gatsby, which actually acts as both static and headless. So that can make it even more confusing. But that's the reality there. Headless is usually talking to an API. For static, the logic is a little bit different as well. So for static, you have literally just only client-side logic that's happening. When I say logic, I mean things like an if-then statement, an on-off statement, like things like that. When you want to say, if this person is, from this IP address range, or if they're in New York State, I want to show this thing on the page. Those things would have to be client-side. And what client-side means is in our purposes, it has to be front end. And we can't really do if statements with HTML, and we can't do if statements with CSS. There is some CSS variables we can mess with, but not the same thing. So we have to do that with JavaScript. So if you want to do client-side logic with a static website, it's got to be JavaScript. On the other side, headless, we actually could be able to do that on both sides. So we could do that on the server side, and we could do it on the client side, because the CMS is still intact, and we're communicating it to the API, which can be able to give us that kind of information there. And the third thing, we're using an existing or custom front end on the static side. It gives us a little bit more flexibility to do that. What you'll see is that, we created a custom theme on the COVID-19 website, but for the example site I'm giving you, I just threw it together last night. The example site I'm going to show you is just using the default WordPress, 2020 theme. Nothing wild at all. We're still able to use Gutenberg, all those things. So you can still use existing tools basically to do that. For headless, it's a little bit more difficult. So headless is usually a completely different front end, JavaScript based. It's usually something you're coding in. There are some efforts right now, specifically with Gatsby, where people are trying to get Gutenberg to work better with that and to make it work, and that's pretty cool. But in general, you can't actually do that with headless there. And so one of the things that, that really sets it apart for me, and this is a me quote, so headless can make a static website, but headless itself isn't static. And what I mean by that is the exception is that things like Gatsby are a static site generator and could create static sites, but the actual way it does it is actually via headless model. But it's not the other way around. You can do it the opposite way. So that being said, the thing that you probably have heard of so far is static site generators, and you probably have run across them even if you didn't know it. Even you might have just heard someone mention it in a WordPress tutorial, or you may have heard someone mention it online somewhere else or on Twitter or whatever. The most popular ones really are these, 7 here. Hugo, which runs on Go by Google. Jekyll, which runs on, I believe it's Ruby in the first place, and that's kind of the ones I started on. And I played with all these, by the way. Next, which I believe is Vue. Next is on, I can't remember, it's the Next.js. I mean, it's generally 11T. I don't remember what it's on. I think React, maybe. Gatsby's definitely on React. And then the last one there is VuePress, which is also on Vue. These are all static site generators. So they're all similar to the model and kind of the thing that I'm going to show you today. But the reality is they're very development heavy. None of these, and I love them all, but none of these are easy to just set up and implement if you haven't done your work before as a developer. I don't care what they tell you. I don't care how simple the tutorials look. It's absolutely true. If you're coming from a WordPress background, maybe you've done some design, you've done some editing with plugins, maybe you've done a theme editing and things like that. That's where it gets a little bit more difficult with those implementations over there, especially if you still want them to communicate to WordPress, which many of them can. You can actually set them up to work with WordPress, which in itself is pretty interesting. But the main kind of directory for that, the Wikipedia of static site generators, is actually this site, staticgen.com. It's a good bookmark. It's definitely one to check out. The example, the plugins that I'm going to show you today is actually on there for WordPress, and you'll find it. It's a regular used one. So when you go to StaticGen, actually, let me just open it real quick. And you see my browser now, right? Just a thumbs up. Okay. On StaticGen, it'll show you, first it shows you by, stars on GitHub. So this is how many people started recently. So it's kind of showing you it's like a litmus test of like what people are working with or, interested in as far as static site generators go. And there are a ton. I mean, this is where it's overwhelmed city for anyone, but especially for me, ADD, I mean, this is like a field day. Like I'll be here for 3 years trying to figure out, which one makes the most sense. So at some point you have to break it down and say, okay, I need to just choose like 2 or 3 that possibly could work on. For me, 11T actually fills in some gaps for me and things I want to do. Gatsby also is actually very good to work with. Had some Gatsby, I'll just, a little disclaimer, had some controversy lately on the way they treat their employees and such. So it's, it's up to you on how you want to work with that. But the one that we're going to be taking a look at specifically, let me see. Oh, come on. I totally saw it earlier. Oh, there, WP2 static. That's the WordPress static site generator I'm going to show you that we use, which also has its own little bits of disclaimer material that I'll explain in a little bit here. As well, but it does work. All right, let me get back to my slides. So with all that said, we got static generation, we got static websites, which basically, it's the same thing as us going back to 2003 and FTPing into a server and putting our HTML onto a page, which I don't even think we were using CSS in 2003 from what I remember. But anyways, static WordPress. So what does it mean? I want to preface this with the fact first that this is such a new frontier. There's not many people actually talking about static WordPress in the first place. So I'm hoping that changes. And I'm really hoping we start doing more of this because I see a huge opportunity here for us to really have a great content management system with a deployment system that makes a lot of sense. So the first thing is, static WordPress, we're deploying the public-facing site to a separate server. It's this concept that wherever we're editing the website is not the place where the public's actually going to see that website. We're going to deploy it to a completely different entity, completely different server that they can access. In the case that I'll show you today, the examples I'll show you today will be places where their username protected, they're online, anyone on the team can get to them. But where I really start kind of blowing your minds is that it doesn't have to be a site that's online at all. It could literally just live on your laptop. This could be a WordPress site that you have on local, local being it's a local development environment. Spin up the WordPress site there, put in your credentials to push it out to one of the different places I'll show you, one of the servers, and that's it. It never actually exists anywhere online except for you in your own little environment. So that too becomes very secure because no one can really get into your local computer and edit that WordPress website. The second big thing is the public facing site never communicates back to WP. You know, it's not going to have any major things that are happening over there. It's not going to be, you know, doing contact forms and sending that data back, which we'll talk about a little bit. It's not going to be pulling in RSS feeds from that site either. So things like an RSS feed actually live on that static site. They don't live on the WordPress site. And then the third characteristic, I think, you know, you're still doing most of the things the WordPress way. And like I said before, I like the WordPress way. I like the fact that we can add plugins in. I like the fact that I could change to a theme and things could still work. I like the fact that I can add custom fields on, or I can add new custom post types, or whatever the case may be, without necessarily tearing down everything and starting over again. So that to me is, you know, a really great kind of bonus that we're able to do that and not affect so much of the process of what we're doing. All right, so there's basically two different ways that you can implement static WordPress sites. The first way is to use a static WordPress host. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I know a lot about Shifter and Static. I haven't used HardyPress as much, so I'm happy to answer questions too if anyone goes down that route. The great thing about these WordPress hosts and kind of the key feature of them is they are all working their tails off trying to find the best process to do this. They are really on the cutting edge. I think, you know, all three of these companies, I think, are going to take off if they keep with it, because they're really doing something that no one else is doing, and they're looking at a space that I think is prime to be able to kind of, you know, take advantage of in the next few years here. Specifically, Shifter is a little bit more dev focused. Shifter has a lot of different nuances and a lot of different things that developers, I think, would like a little bit more. But the Shifter team also is very active on Twitter and available to kind of answer questions. But they've also been figuring out some workaround solutions to things like getting gravity forms to work in a static site, getting search to work in a static site. And they have a lot of different tutorials they put on their own website on that type of information. So, you know, you don't necessarily have to use them as a host, but they're happy to even give you just information on how to do these things with your own static setup, even using the plugins that I'm going to be talking about. Static is, I think, probably, I mean, I dare say it's one of the best and one of the most professional so far. Static has, you know, funding behind it, I think, in the past year even. The folks that are involved in and spearheading this are people that are leaders in the WordPress industry in general. They're working very hard at figuring out that gap, and I think they're going to do it out of the three. I think, you know, they're definitely on the cusp of it, figuring out that gap of how do you take a large site, let's say like, you know, Time Magazine type of site on WordPress. How do you do static for them? How do you do it in a fact that, you know, you're not, you know, redeploying the entire website of hundreds of thousands of pages every time you're trying to push this out? And how do you do it in a manner that if there's a new feature, a new plugin involved, or whatever the case may be, you can do it in kind of compartmentalized ways throughout there. The work they're doing, I think, is going to lay some major groundwork for where we go in the next few years. And HardyPress, I think HardyPress to me is the most consumer capable one. It's, you know, if you're getting into it and you're just trying to get a sense of it and trying to play around and dabble and be able to work with it, HardyPress is so straightforward and so quick to get implemented and used. That's where I would say to start. I'd say to start looking at HardyPress first, and then you can move on to other ones as you kind of see fit and see the things that they can do there. So that's one way to go is host. That's not the way we went. I actually did test out the host. I actually did run through actual scenarios and said, okay, if someone on our team edited this thing, and then they edited that thing, and then we need to deploy, like, one right after the other, what's that look like? What's the timing look like? Unfortunately, none of them for me were our use case and what we wanted to be able to use. But also, too, I don't know that the hosts are for me because I'm more development driven. I'm very more advanced kind of on the development implementation I want to be able to do. So what we did is we looked at what plugins would make sense. And for us, it was looking at kind of what are the leaders out there? What are people using? So the leader definitely is WP to Static. That's definitely the front runner. WP to Static's been around a few years. It's run by one person, a man named Leon. I can't remember his last name. Really great individual. Really well knowledged in kind of running static websites and deploying like this for WordPress. Incidentally, he actually enjoys deploying static sites not on WordPress, but he likes creating plugins for WordPress. So it works out, sure. And I think it actually runs an advantage though, because the work that he does for his own site, his own marketing websites, which are on other static site generators, actually comes over into what he does for WordPress, because it becomes something where you see the influence of what he's learned in other places to be put into this. So this is where our tale gets interesting. Simply Static is the other major contender. It's about 2 years old. It was originally created by a company called Code of Conduct. I don't even know if they're around anymore. The plugin still works, so you can use it, but the reality is it just hasn't been updated in 2 years. But what's since happened is that Leon, who does WP to Static, has actually made a forked version of Simply Static, which is more consumer level rather than developer level, and called it Simpler Static. I don't believe it's live yet. It's coming out. So he's taken, basically your WP to Static, which is more development driven one, making Simply Static, which seems to be a more consumer based one, more kind of designer or, creator, content creator type of thing like that. To work with as well. And then the last one is Static HTML Output plugin, which is, I learned last night, and this is where it gets interesting, is that this is the new direction Leon is taking WP to Static. That what I used to know as WP to Static plugin until last night is now going to be Static HTML Output plugin. So it's a little bit of a roller coaster, but I went through today and actually did an install of it. I did a whole demo of it right before we got on the call here, just to make sure everything actually works, and it does. It's pretty much the same thing as WP to Static. So the method I'll show you is the same type of operation. All right. So that being said, that's everything about static site generators. So let me show you how it actually works. So let me show you kind of the setup of how everything is. All right. So the process looks like this. And so this is the process I did for Pinellas, and it's the same process I'm going to show you in the example I have as well. So the process is the WordPress website runs on a password protected website, completely separate from the public. Like I said, no one can get to it except for us. The public website runs in Netlify. And this could be anything else. This could be Amazon S3. This could be Cloudflare. This could be Bunny CDN, which is a newer CDN out there. It could be GitHub Pages also, which is another popular one. The whole concept, though, is it's a static host. And you can even throw it onto like a DigitalOcean or Cloudways or anything like that. Essentially, all you need is you just need, an Apache type of server to serve these pages, and that's it. Something like Netlify, though, is a little bit interesting because the way it works is you deploy to it. It tells you information about that deploy. It also provides a CDN right away. It provides a few other hooks and interesting things that you can utilize as well. Like there's some Netlify forms that you could hook Gravity Forms into, which is pretty interesting. Something I might talk to you about, Jim. So there's little pieces like that that make it a little bit more advantageous for future work, kind of where you want to take it. And then the way it works is that you have your WordPress site over on the, on the left, you have your Netlify site on the right, or whatever it is, and then you're using WP to Static to actually push that over there. And again, that could be, the WP to Static could be any of the any of those plugins I mentioned there, or even, plugins to come. I'm sure they'll work in the same type of process, because this is exactly how a static site generator works. If we weren't talking about necessarily about doing it, with this method, you could insert any of those static site generators I mentioned before to be in the place of WP static there. It's the same type of thing. So they're basically things to realize though with that. I have found by default only admin users can deploy, and I think that's important. You don't want editors or just general folks going in there that are editing something to deploy. The way it works, and you'll see, is we don't deploy every time something's published. We actually have to go to the plugin and deploy at specific times manually. You can set it up on like a cron job or something like that if you wanted to, and you can use WP CLI too if you're more development driven and want to do that. But the reality to me is that I think it's really important to limit the admins that you have on a WordPress site, and make it so that only those admins are the ones that can actually deploy to the actual public site. And the other, telling thing is that admin users need to kind of let other admin users know before they're going to deploy. What you don't want is you don't want two deployments happening at the same time. It can work. We've done it. I actually tested up to 3. So having 3 different people deploying at the same time to see which one wins. Essentially, it's just whichever deployment goes in last, basically into the system on Netlify or wherever you have. Will be the one that goes live to people. But you don't really want to cross the streams. You don't want to chance it. You don't want to mess something up. So just letting people know that you're going to do it's kind of important. All right, so let me do a little demo. And actually, this is interactive too, so you can actually take a look at it. I didn't give you the WordPress admin side, but I gave you the username and password to actually get into the website. The website's at staticwordpress.wpmu.dev.host. And that's the username and password. I'll give you a few seconds there for anyone who wants to get into it. And what you should see is the 2020 theme. I made a little custom logo last night. Just says like static demo, I think, or something. And I'll show it to you in a sec. I'll just give you guys like 30 seconds to check that out. Okay. And then, so that was the WordPress side. And then the Netlify side, again, you got to love the beauty of Cloudflare and everything. I just set this up right before our meeting and it's already working and propagating. Static.schutzsmith.com. Static.schutzsmith.com is the end result, the place where we're actually deploying to. So you can open that up in a browser as well. And you should see that the 2 sites look identical. I believe I pushed them to make them look identical. So static.schutzsmith.com. And you'll notice there's no L in my name, so it's not Schultzsmith, just Schutzsmith. Okay. So let's watch the magic. So I'm gonna go ahead and show over here on my screen. Does everyone see the browser? Okay. I'm gonna go to my home here. And WPMU DevHost, just so you know, that's just WPMU if you've never worked with it before. They make a lot of plugins specifically for multi-site. I like them. They give me 3 free hosts to work, 3 free websites to work with on their hosts. So that's why I throw stuff like this over there. It's great to use. And in the dashboard here, there's a few things you'll notice. One is you'll see our presentation for tonight's over here on the right. So it actually shows up there, but I'll go to the pages here. And I'm going to show you a few different pages. And so we have like about this website, which is just generic text kind of content. And it's just similar to what I set up on the front end there as far as the design goes. We have the traditional sample page there. I've also put up one just of the site slides with the embed code for slides here as well. So that's all there also. And then if I go to the front here, oh, let me get back to it. So here's the actual static demo site. So here's our pages. We're gonna just edit a page and we'll add a new one, and I'll just show you how quick and how it all works. And of course I had to put in a Rickroll as well, so that we have a video example page with a Rickroll. In the back end, the way that we actually deploy is, I'm gonna go down to what's called static HTML. And static HTML is that plugin. So this is the plugin I've installed into the back end. With that, the first thing that you might be able to see, and let me know if it's, is it tiny on your screen or can you kind of see it okay?
It's pretty good.
Okay. So you'll see a few things. So we're able to, by default, we're able to deploy via just a zip file. And that's kind of the traditional way that something like GitHub Pages or Netlify works. You can actually just put a zip file into it and it actually would serve it as a website. Or we can choose specific ones like Amazon S3. We could throw it to Bitbucket if we wanted to. We could do Bunny CDN like I mentioned, GitHub Pages, or we can throw it to GitLab or to Netlify. For those that haven't worked with Netlify before, it's at netlify.com. That's what it looks like. Netlify is pretty great folks that are kind of trying to advance the web and make it be able to do things. One of the key great things about it is that by default, their hosting is free for most of the use cases that we'll need. It's, you know, for something that's a small site with just a couple hundred or a couple thousand people coming a month, you know, you're not gonna be paying anything on there. But the caveat is these are static. It's only for static websites. You cannot take your WordPress site and set up a database and all the things like that on there and move it over. That doesn't work. So it's only for deploying to for a static website. And you can, you know, feel free to sign up for that as well. It's a great service, and I'm happy to answer any questions too that might come up for you doing that. So for this plugin to set it up, it's actually not that difficult. The first thing we want to do is we want to see what the destination URL is going to be. So in my case, it's going to be static.shipsmith.com. Those are settings that I've already set up over here in Netlify. I've already said, you know, kind of what my site's going to be. I've set up, you know, following their directions on how to create a custom domain. I set up my Cloudflare to change the DNS and did all that stuff. All in all, that whole thing took me about 10 minutes at 5:25 tonight. Didn't take very long at all. The other key thing is that it's going to ask you to put in what's called a personal access token. It's kind of like a password. This is something so that, you know, externally other applications can communicate with Netlify and do things on your behalf. And so in this case, I'm literally telling it to let Netlify, or to tell Netlify that we want to be able to push things to it. And so by putting that in here, that's what it's able to do. So whatever I want it to do here, it's going to do it for me over in Netlify. The other thing I put in is the site ID, and Netlify is a little bit interesting where it gives you automatic different site IDs no matter what. So in my case, mine is Wonderful Swartz 4AD164. As far as I know, there's no changing that, and that's what it's going to be for this static website no matter what. But that's what I go ahead and put in there to make it work. And then the other key things is if I had things I wanted to redirect, I could put it in here to the redirects file. So say, for example, I changed some different, you know, like home pages, or sorry, I changed maybe some about page to go somewhere else, or I renamed something. I'd actually put it in this redirects file here. And so the way it goes is you put in, like, you know, whatever it is you wanted to redirect, do a space, and then say wherever you're sending it to, you know, special page, whatever the case may be. And that would be enough for a redirect to actually work. I'm going to delete that because I'll mess this up if I do. And then to test it, I can just test it, and it says, you know, upload test successful. It works. It knows what's going on. So the other key thing on this, so that's the first part, just setting up all the information. The second part to it is the crawling aspect. And this is how static site generators work in general. So any of the ones you work with, whether it's Gatsby or Next or or this, or WP to static, they all work in the sense that they crawl the actual content that's on the site. They're trying to look at it from the point of view of your browser, so same type of circumstance, but they're also trying to put some added benefits on it, right? In this case, this plugin can look at it from two lenses, right? It can look at it from the front end, which is just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but because it's a plugin inside of PHP on a WordPress instance, it can also look at the PHP side to see what things it might need to be including that it didn't know about, or that we want to make sure that are there. And so that's exactly what it does. So the crawling aspect of this, first part is, it wants to know, is there a user and password that you need to put in to get to the website? And there is, so I put that in there. Then we can actually, if you had a specific port to do it on, which would be pretty popular if you're doing local development, you might have it on a port like 888 or something. Something like that might make sense. Then it shows you what that initial crawl list is. And so I can do show detected URLs. It opens a new page and shows me all the pages it's actually going to look at right now. And so in my case, it's going to look for the home page, which is just that /. Let me actually make this larger. There we go. It's going to look at that home page, which is the /. It's going to look at these just normal archive pages and the actual blog post that's by default in there. This is the about page, default category page. Actually, I don't know what adds that text is. I got to check that out and see. I've never seen that come up before. Fave icon, because I actually set one on here. A robots.txt, a sample page, which is that page we talked about. Slides and video examples, and also the new sitemap.xml that comes in the new WordPress version. So all those things are automatically included in there. Now, if I added a new page, which we're going to do, you're going to see that it'll show up in there as well. And let me just put my size back to normal. There we go. We can also exclude certain URLs. So one that I kind of play around with, and something that you'll see is that when we push this to static, you can still get to the /wp-admin, but it doesn't do anything because it's not hooked up. So it still shows like a login field, a login form, but it doesn't actually do anything or go anywhere because it doesn't know where to go or what to do. So you could put that in here and to exclude that if you wanted to. You could exclude other things too. Maybe there's specific JavaScript you don't want people to be able to access. Maybe there's some PHP file you're referencing or something. All those types of things would make sense in here. And then what I've had to do quite a bit on the Pinellas County sites is actually include additional URLs. So in our case, when we launched the site, it was before the most recent version of WordPress. There's no sitemap.xml available by default in WordPress. So we were using Yoast sitemap.xml. And for Yoast plugin, for that you actually have to reference it in the plugin here for it to know that it should actually look at it. And so that's what I did. So I actually just reference that, put it right in there to make sure that it would find it there. And then the rest of the settings here, like crawl delay, that's really something you just get into if you find that you're actually timing out on some of the crawling that's needing to happen. I haven't gotten to that issue yet. The COVID site has, I think it's about 70 pages now, somewhere around there. Haven't gotten into any issue with being that many pages at all for that kind of thing. I would guess that, once we get to like a couple hundred pages, we might have some issues. And that's what I'm trying to determine too for, the larger website redesign and what makes sense. And then inside of here too, some other interesting things, which I haven't gotten into yet, but I really want to, is one of the things we could do is we can rewrite the links that are actually in the source code. So we could actually make it so that, I'm just zooming here a little bit. Most interesting thing to me is this. We could actually make it so that something like the WP content themes folder, like when we're referencing the things in there, the CSS, all those types of pieces, we can actually rename it to completely something else. Something that does not sound WordPressy at all. For one, it's useful because it can mask it and people just won't even know it's a WordPress site. It impresses your dev friends. There you go. But the other thing too is that it also eliminates some of the security issues. Just right off the bat, people aren't necessarily realizing it's a WordPress site. They might not be sending bots to it to try to do specific types of things, all which can, hit the server and kind of take away needed hits you need from real folks. I'll go back to normal size here. And then we can also rename exported directories as well. So you can rename the whole directory. So instead of just specific URLs, you can actually just say, okay, anything from WP content should be called contents instead, or anything from, includes, WP includes should be just inc instead. Because it's pretty interesting there. And then some other key pieces, you can remove HTML comments by default, remove WP links, meta tags, all kinds of stuff like that, which I'll do no matter what in there. And then advanced options, I gotta admit, I haven't gotten into yet. I just haven't had a need to get into them yet to look at, batch sizes or delaying crawls or things like that, or delaying API requests. But there is one thing I have had to use, which is this delete deploy cache. And that is because the way it crawls is it actually caches what it's done so far. So when it deploys a new version of this to Netlify, to the website, and again, it can be whatever you want it to be, whatever server, it's going to look for what's been updated, what page has been updated. And so specifically, it's not going to give me a new about page and all those other pages that we have here. It's only going to give me the page that's been updated or a new page that's been in there. That's it. It's not going to give me everything else. If instead I wanted it to do everything again and just completely from scratch, that's when we do delete deploy cache, and it'll redo the entire site from there. Useful if you accidentally push the staging site to the live site and take the server offline for 10 minutes. I learned the hard way, and now I know. All right. And the last piece is logs. And so you can be able to see a log of how everything's been done there. So with no further ado, let's actually kick some stuff up there. So I'm going to go to the About This website. I'm going to edit this. And I'm just going to add another paragraph. Slides coming soon. They will be fun. That's it, just adding a sentence in there. I'll do update. So that's all set. I'm going to go back over to my static HTML. I'm just going to refresh it just to make sure. And then I'm going to do start site export. And so that'll run its thing. It's going to say it's crawling the initial file list. It's looking for what's changed. Deploying an Netlify, and it's done. It took 5 seconds. So this is ready. It's done. On that Pinellas County COVID website I was mentioning, we're around 2 minutes, basically. It depends on what the change is and how long it'll take to deploy something. And that's because we have a lot of graphics. We have a lot of downloadable files, things like that. Now I can go to my deployed website. That's going to take me to the static-judgment.com. If I go to About, we might not see the change right away. Oh no, it's already there. Slides coming soon, and they will be fun. So this is already, it's running through a CDN. It's actually, caching it on their end, on Netlify's end. I found that it takes anywhere from about 5 seconds to about 30 seconds, depending on what those changes are, to actually show up here instead of there. I did do tests on Amazon S3 as well. Same thing. It took a little bit for S3 to actually show up. The issue I had with S3, and the reason we didn't go that route, is it was actually just a little bit slower, which was interesting. The Netlify was, as far as the pushing it out to it. So it just, made sense to go in the Netlify direction for this specific thing. Let me go back over here. So that's the main process of how we put this stuff together and how we deploy out of there. There's just a few other things I'm going to mention to you, and then happy to answer any questions as well. So looking at this, we got to say, well, what's the use cases, right? When does this actually make sense? We can't do traditional forms like you would do. We can't do PHP logic and things like that. What I found and what I think is it's great for marketing websites. It's great for sites that are very informational in nature, where we need to get information out to people. We don't want it to get hung up on the WordPress side. We want it to be super secure. And to me, that's, a lot of government websites, to me, fulfill that need. Anything, I think, where we need to get the message out, but we don't necessarily need to get information back from them. I think that's where it's a really good use case. It's also, I think, right now, In a year or two from now, it might be completely different. But right now, I think it's best for smallish websites. Things that are like less than 100 pages. You know, I'm going to be running some tests. I have some very large websites to try and see what works and how it works. But I would say it's really for smallish websites right now. I think the technology will catch up. I think, you know, like I said, those hosting companies especially are making great strides in what they're doing. But right now, I don't think I would feel comfortable putting like a 10,000 page website onto a static host or a static deployment like this just yet. Right now, talk to me in a year. We'll see. And I would not run a community website on this either. So something that's like a multi-user blog, something of that nature. I wouldn't do that right now either. Some workarounds. I'm getting some feedback too, by the way. There we go. Some workarounds I think that are kind of necessary to make this work. One of the first things is that all forms need to be externally hosted. Like I said, Shifter hosting is trying to figure out a way, or actually has figured out a way, to use Netlify forms with Gravity forms to make it work. But it's a hack. It's a workaround, right? It's going to work, and then if someone changes their API on either side, it won't work, and so it has to be updated. So the only surefire way to make something work is to have an external form that you actually put in there. And that's, things all the way back to Wufoo from a few years ago, to FormSite, to, whatever CRM or something, Salesforce or whatever that might have a form that you want to embed in there. For most clients, ironically, it actually doesn't become that big of an issue, at least for the ones I work with, because they're already using like a CRM where they, we're using a Gravity Forms or something else to push into that traditionally. So in this case, we're just, kind of circumventing and having to embed that form instead in these circumstances. But that also goes for, comments. Comments are forms. So if you're going to have a blog and you have comments coming in, then you need to look for something else to actually take those comments in. Facebook comments, implementation, I think is pretty rapid for a lot of people. Discourse too, yeah. So you have to have something like that in place. The other key thing is that anything database driven has to be rethought. So if you have something where you're, listing like a bunch of different real estate, entities and be able to search them and filter them and do all kinds of stuff like that, you have to really rethink how you're doing that. If you're going to keep it the way it is, you have to make sure that you're calling the right AJAX calls and things like that for your deployment plugin to be able to see that, or rethink it completely and rewrite it in something that's pretty front-end based with JavaScript. And then the last thing is some plugins will need to be added to the crawl list. And I learned that the hard way with Yoast. I also learned that some plugins just won't work. There's a plugin I tried to use, a social, those social media walls that everyone wants. It's got the whole social media wall, everything's coming down. Flow, that's what it is, Flow from Theme Forest. I tried literally for a day trying to figure out how to get it to work in a static environment, and it just was not possible because no matter what, it's hitting PHP to be able to show what's actually happening on the front end. And so I had to abandon that and actually go to a different direction. So just be aware of that some plugins, no matter what, are going to hit PHP, and there's no way around it for it to be able to work.
Yeah, some of them are back end as opposed to front end, and so that's where you run into your blockers.
Yep. So my advice, go slowly and be careful. And of course I had to put in a Star Trek reference as well. So happy to answer any questions, walk through some more of the plugins, talk about hosts, whatever. And Jim, you there?
Daniel, I have a question. Many of us using existing hosts, can this be as an add-on domain on existing hosts that we have, the standard whatever anybody's using nowadays, whether it be Bluehost or can it be or does one have to go to these static hosts, Shifter, HardyPress, or Static?
You don't have to. So the difference is going to be a managed WordPress host wouldn't work for what we're doing here. So, managed WordPress host would work for the actual WordPress part, for that part of having the CMS. But the actual deployment of it, that would be somewhere else. So that would be, like a DigitalOcean, Amazon, a Netlify, whatever. Cloudways, your own, your own dream host that has just a regular Apache server could work, like that type of thing. Bluehost with an Apache server could work. Sure.
Hey, Daniel, I got to drop, but I've been listening in the other room. That's the nice thing about the headphones. I heard the whole talk. I couldn't see it, but I heard it. And you did a great job. So did you need me to do anything, or are you good?
Nope, just everyone. We have another meetup next week.
Oh, yeah. Next week we have another meetup. It's definitely listed on wptampabay.org. It's in our calendar list. It's the mega WordPress meetup for the whole state.
Mega.
Yeah, mega. Dimension Media, I think, is what Elaine might have a link for it. She can drop in there. Yeah, so I'll let her take it if she can find it.
All right, thanks, Jim.
All right, thanks, guys. Great job, seriously. I listened to the whole thing. It was really fascinating. So I just wish I could have watched it. All right, bye, guys.
All right, hey Daniel, I have a question.
Yeah.
And I guess it's a two-part question, but I picked up on something you mentioned as kind of a passing comment. I heard you mention version control earlier. And my question is about websites, perhaps on the larger end of what you'd recommend for this static deployment method. And my question is about, what about websites that have an enormous number of large images? If you make a small change to a word, let's just say you change the spelling of the word, would you have to redeploy the whole website with all those images? And is checking the output into version control an alternative way to distribute that a little more efficiently?
Yeah. No, it won't. It won't send out. It won't redeploy all those images. So all these plugins look for what's changed and try to just change those things. Where it gets hairy, though, is if you change, like say you added a new page or something, that new page then has that image added to it. I don't know if it would try to deploy that image again because now it's a part of that page, so it thinks it's a resource. I don't know if it's that smart or not. It's something you'd have to just try out and see. But it won't redeploy the entire database of images. It won't do that. And that's across the host too. The hosts don't do it that way either. So typically they're trying to just deploy what things have changed there. And that's the reason for that caching as well. That they have that caching piece there. Mm-hmm. And the thing I'm sharing here on my screen, if you can see it, is in the case of Netlify, Amazon S3 has this too. And so GitHub Pages would too, because it's moving it as Git in a versioning repo. It'll show you, what's been deployed, basically what things have been changed. This is the deployment we just did before. It shows me, one new file was added. It tells me what the file was.
And actually, I think your screen stopped sharing.
Oh, let me try again. Let's do.
There we go.
Okay. So this is in the deployment piece here. So it'll show you, what things have changed, if any links have changed, things like that. So it's pretty thorough to kind of give you a sense of, what's happened there. And again, that'll work for Amazon S3, for GitHub, for GitLab, Bitbucket. Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Have you run any challenges using like WebExpress P, for instance, where it's using Google's latest standards? I mean, even though it's 8 years old. Have you run any challenges on that deployment for the compressed images with that?
Not that I've seen. I'm using Smush Pro for a lot of stuff, so it'll make WebP for some stuff that we tell it to do. But I haven't seen anything having issues. As far as I know, if it's available on the front end and you can see it and you can crawl it, then it'll be okay. Is there something on a Logic PHP side where you think it would interfere?
Yeah, because the way that I'm not using WP Smush It. I'm using the open source WebExpress plugin. where it actually does uses PHP buffering in itself,
Yeah,
and then it modifies the page outsource itself and wraps it in the picture tag. So I'm kind of curious to see how that plays out.
That definitely would do something. Yeah, I'd like to test that for sure. And happy to, if you ever want to collaborate on something that sounds like a plugin adaptation we can make.
Yeah, that'll be fun. I'll ping you after the meeting.
Yeah.
Because I was using Simply Static on a Stanford University site about 2.5 years ago. It was one of the student study sites. They had about 3,000 or 4,000 pages. And the idea was to, instead of using a headless CMS, because they were using both Markdown and internal proprietary SQLite, we converted it over to a static site and then used Discuss on it instead to be able to allow for multiple social network integration. So that saved the server head bandwidth like terabytes a month of just unnecessary travel. Yeah, I think it was like 40 gigs overall on the site, and then afterwards it was like 3 gigs. So quite interesting to see. I'd actually see what they're doing now with WP2 static. That'd be fun to see.
Yeah.
I guess that was my only question, was about like the latest image standards and stuff like that. If you've run into any other issues with that.
Yeah, not really. I'm trying to think of. Yeah, we haven't had any real issues with that, or with caching CSS or anything like that. I actually thought that the big issue would be when we push, because we use SAS for everything, so everything's SAS, and we're compiling it. Before we push it into the site, we actually have a whole process that precedes all of this too, which is we're pushing to GitLab then deploys to the staging site that you saw. And puts that stuff out. So for that, we haven't seen any image issues because we're usually keeping images at the CMS level. We're not messing with them before that.
Okay, so typically whenever you had to go in and change a source image, such as what Scott was talking about, do you ever do like a search and replace within the media, or do you physically go in and replace that media manually, globally, if that particular asset needs to be changed?
So we replaced it with the media replace plugin. I've been using this for a few years.
And you have no issues with that regarding?
No.
That's good. Okay, I was actually thinking about that. I was like,
Yeah, enable media replace, and it's consistently updated. It's very, very low on the overhead, and you can replace it either by just replacing that file. You can replace it with a renamed file. You can keep the same date or change the date if you want to of when it was created. And the reason to change the date is so that something like a Google or something would know that it's definitely been changed. But yeah, that's really been the best way to kind of do it. Again, keeping it the WordPress way, so that it's something our editors can maintain and work with.
Yeah, that almost feels like it's just a feature that should be baked into WordPress at the core.
That is a definite. We'll probably take this out of the recording, but that is something that
Sorry.
should be in there. No, it's totally true though. But there's a lot of things like that I think a good presentation, if someone wants to take it up, would be what are kind of the things that are must-have plugins that actually should just be baked into core for WordPress. And this is definitely one of them, yeah.
And I think that kind of helps answer your question and concern, Scott, where, if you were to go and replace it, how would that affect, if it's underneath version control or whatnot. So that's how they handle it internally.
Gotcha. Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I think I got tripped up when I saw that export as zip option. I'm picturing 2 gigabyte zip files flying around the internet, but it sounds like this is a lot more efficient.
Daniel, I have a question regarding how does this affect different page builders? Does it matter?
So, not that I know of, it doesn't matter. So originally we had tried Elementor for this. And from my initial tests, you know, just putting together some basic designs, everything worked fine. We ended up departing Elementor and just focusing on Gutenberg for the COVID site. So I'm not sure if we got more technical and more, you know, deeper into Elementor integration, if it would have caused some hiccups, but you know, just the onset, just pushing what we had in Elementor seemed fine.
Yeah, Gutenberg is great, and I've built a site on it, but I still find that Gutenberg does have some limitations, or at least maybe my abilities are the limitations.
Definitely. Yeah, and Gutenberg's not a page builder. I don't care what anyone says.
No,
it's not a page builder. Yeah, it's a content builder is what it is. But yeah.
Exactly. Although I do like the features that what Advanced Custom Fields have brought to the table to build out new blocks as needed.
Yeah. Yep, and that's the method that we use actually. So another presentation to be had is how we created custom blocks with ACF. Yeah, you know, if you're used to PHP-based programming, then the ACF blocks are actually a great way to go.
Yeah, it's nice to keep it under source control, real easy for your modular blocks and everything else.
Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely awesome.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yep,
I got something to play with tonight.
Sounds good. And of course, I'm here to answer any questions too. If you haven't already, we have a Slack as well. So if you go to WordPress Tampa Bay, you'll see the invitations to get on the Slack also. And like Jim said, we have a meetup next week, and then this WordPress meetup happens the second Tuesday of every month. So keep looking out for us and subscribe, and you'll find out about next month's.
Sweet. So you said wptampabay.org?
I believe so. Is that what it is, Elaine?
Yes, that's correct.
Cool.
There you go. And if anyone's interested in presenting, just let me know.
Sweet. Well, I'll be pinging you a little later, Dan.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.